Good morning. My name is Katie and I'm with Lawyers for Learners. Thank you for joining us for this Lawyers for Learners webinar, Name and Gender Marker Changes. Today, this presentation will consist of an overview of the process of changing a person's legal name and gender markers in the state of Wisconsin. Our presenter today is Evan McCarthy. Evan is a staff attorney with Legal Action of Wisconsin's Student Legal Aid Project, which assists students and community members with background check cleanup, driver's license reinstatement, bankruptcy, and more. He attended the University of Iowa College of Law and graduated in 2019 and started practicing in Wisconsin in that same year. He practiced immigration law in Milwaukee prior to joining Legal Action in the summer of 2022. Thank you for presenting this very important topic and sharing your expertise with us, Evan. With that, I'll pass it over.
Cool. Thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone for coming. My name's Evan. I'm a staff attorney with Legal Action. So what our project does at Student Legal Aid is help people overcome barriers to employment is the broader frame. So some of the things that we do include helping people clean up criminal background checks, get driver's license back, apply for pardons if they're eligible. And we work with students in tech colleges all over southern Wisconsin in our service area. But one of the areas that we're hoping to expand our practice to is what I'm going to talk about today, because this is an area that I think more people have been asking for help with. And there's been a little bit of movement in some of the relevant laws and policies in Wisconsin in recent years. So I hope that this will be a good overview. I'm not sure it's expertise quite yet, but we're going to get there. But I think it'll be a good overview of the situation in Wisconsin for changing name and gender marker. So I am going to start up the PowerPoint. There are a lot of reasons that people would want to change a name or a gender marker in Wisconsin. Probably some of the people attending right now have undergone the name change process, maybe the gender marker process as well. But name changes are very commonly done. Usually, the most common situation would be in the case of a marriage. But one of the commonalities with both name changes and gender markers is that they both require a court order. So there are forms and procedures that you have to follow in Wisconsin before you go before a circuit court judge and have a small hearing. Essentially, it's not necessarily like a full formal hearing that you'd see in a criminal or a civil trial, but it does go before a judge, and a judge has to sign off on it in both cases. So a name change, that can be done for a variety of different reasons, but the focus of this presentation is going to be on people who want a name change so that their legal name conforms with their gender identity or the name that they prefer to be known by. So gender marker change is similar in that a gender marker is just the little, usually it's M or F. Sometimes you'll see X or options for people to input their own gender markers if they'd like. In Wisconsin, a gender marker can only be male or female. There are some federal documents where you can have an X or another type of gender marker, but as of right now in Wisconsin, it's only male or female. So that is determined by what is on a person's birth certificate and the sex that is assigned at the time of that person's birth. So if you want to change a gender marker on any document in Wisconsin, you have to change the birth certificate first, or have certain other types of documentation for like a driver's license, for example. I'll get to that in a later part of the presentation. But changing a name typically, as a rule of thumb, is easier than changing a gender marker. There are some additional requirements for changing a gender marker in Wisconsin. But one of the things that has inspired us to expand our practice area to include this is just the acknowledgement that as people are, I think, becoming more aware, first of all, that a person's gender or a person's name doesn't necessarily correspond with what they were assigned at birth, or, there are all sorts of reasons that you might want to change your name or your gender marker. It's very important to people, especially students and younger folks, to have documentation that conforms with who they actually are. It can feel very affirming, and conversely, it can feel very alienating, and sometimes it can kind of reopen old wounds in a few cases for people to consistently be dead named or consistently be referred to as the wrong gender. So this is a way for us to help people feel more comfortable, help people affirm their gender identities, the name that they want to be known by, and help people feel better about the kinds of documentation that they're going to be dealing with, like driver's licenses or passports or all sorts of official things, marriage records, school records, medical records. All of that is affected by the name and the gender marker that you have on a birth certificate. So for name changes, I'm going to start with just an overview. First, I'm going to give just a little bit of info on the real barriers that there are to name changes. So one of the few barriers is that Wisconsin prohibits you from having a name change done if you're on a sex offender registry. It also prohibits you from having a name change done if the reason that you're requesting the name change is to avoid people finding out about a criminal record. So that's something that, if you volunteer that information, there's an opportunity on the form that you fill out to give why you want to change your name. I think if you volunteer that I'm changing my name to avoid a criminal record, that's probably a bad idea. But that's something that there would have to be probably other kind of extraneous evidence that they would have to look to have that be a bar. But that's something to be aware of, I think. Wisconsin also does require that people with professional licenses, so nurses, attorneys, not teachers, there's a specific carve out for educators in the state, but you have to get permission from your licensing board before you can get a name change if you do have a professional licensing requirement. That's probably pretty easy to do. This happens again all the time when people are getting married, or you can change your name for a variety of different reasons that have nothing to do with gender identity, but that's something to be aware of as well. And one of the big things, not necessarily a hurdle, but it does affect the willingness of some folks to do a name change in Wisconsin, is that you have to publish notice for 3 weeks in a paper of record. So that's usually like the flagship newspaper for a county or a town in Wisconsin. But one of the things you have to present to the court before a judge will sign off on a name change request is that you have done that publication requirement. If that's infeasible, or if you have concerns about confidentiality, then there are ways to get around that. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But that publication requirement is just an extra step. You have to let the world know, essentially, that you were going by one name and you're going to be going by another name in the future. So there are several forms. All of these are available on the Wisconsin Circuit Court's websites. If you just search that and then go to they have a separate page for name change documents, then they've got all of those forms there. But there are 4 forms that you have to complete, and a lot of that is basically doing a judge's legwork for them. Judges and courts are kind of lazy. They like to have the people before them do as much of the documentation as they can before they sign off on anything. So what those are the first form is just a 1-page of what your name is, your address, just basic demographic information, your legal name at the time, I should say, and then what you want your name to be changed to. And then they give an opportunity for just a couple of lines of why you want your name to be changed. So that form is pretty simple. It's very easy to fill out, and you can attach or submit additional documents as you would like. But that is the main form, the CV 450, if you care about the special designation. But the other forms there, the 3 others, are the proposed order for the hearing date that the judge will grant, and then the last 2 are a proposed order approving and then a proposed order denying. So there's not a lot to do for those 3, but those are just kind of court bookkeeping and scheduling documents that you have to submit as well. You have to file hard copies of those. You can't e-file, and you have to file in the circuit court for the county where you live. So you can do that at the clerk of court's office. That's the place where you would go to like pay fines if you had like a traffic ticket or something, or any sort of court records would be routed through there as well. And there is a filing fee associated with this, and then also with gender marker changes. It's the same for both, but that's $164.50. And you can waive that fee. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's something that some folks might have trouble paying, but you have to either have the fee waiver submitted at the same time or pay it before they will actually schedule anything. So after you submit those forms, sometimes on the same day, kind of depending on the county where you are, sometimes it'll be a few weeks later, you'll get a hearing date. And in between that hearing date and the time that you submitted, you have to publish the notice of the name change in that paper of record. So that's a process that you can take care of with any number of newspapers across the state. The clerk of court will tell you what counts as a paper of record. It can't be, like your buddy's underground zine necessarily. It'll be like a Journal Sentinel or another flagship paper that you have to publish this notice in. And that's very, very common. So any newspaper will have a procedure in place almost certainly. The big ones usually have online forms that you can fill out, and there is usually a cost associated with that. But the entire process is usually, as far as court processes go, quite quick. It can take anywhere from just a few weeks, depending on the publication process, to a couple of months to finish everything up. If it's confidential, it might be much faster, or there might be some additional bumps along the way. But something else that we want people to be aware of is that because it is a court proceeding, it's all public record unless there is that confidentiality requirement. So anything that you submit will appear on CCAP. It will be searchable. People will be able to see if they look up under an old name, assuming that it's granted. If they look up under an old name on CCAP, then that will appear on CCAP that you requested a name change. So there is an option for a confidential name change procedure in Wisconsin. That's something that if, let's say, your family situation is less than ideal, or if you're afraid of abuse or retaliation or any sort of other concerns that could make having that open publication requirement and having things appear on CCAP less attractive, then you can submit a confidential name change request. One of the bigger obstacles is that it's up to the judge to determine whether the request has merit, because the standard is that you would be put at risk of harm. And there's not a lot of guidance as to what counts as harm necessarily. So what we and others would recommend would be that if you have, let's say, if you're working with a counselor or a therapist, if you can show that you would be at risk of, if your family situation is bad, you would be at risk of maybe abuse from your family, whether that's physical, mental, emotional abuse. If you feel that you might be put at physical danger because of any number of things, like people that you know, or you're afraid of retaliation, then all of those are things that you could submit, but it is anecdotally kind of a higher bar to clear. It's probably not going to be enough just to say that you're worried about a general kind of retaliation or a general unspecified kind of fear of people being unhappy that you're doing a name change. But that is something to be aware of, that if you would rather it be confidential, it will be kind of a heavier lift. But you submit that with the same process as with a non-confidential name change. The only difference is that if a confidential name change petition is granted, you don't have to publish it in a paper of record. So that's the situation where, depending on the court's schedule, you could get it done on the same day as you file everything. The clerk of court might just send you in to talk to a judge in a couple of hours. But there are slightly different forms for those. Those are all also available on the clerk of court's website. And if you apply for a confidential name change and that's rejected, you can still try for a public one. It doesn't lock you out of trying the non-confidential version as well. So both of those procedures do cost that $164.50 fee. You can apply for a fee waiver like you can for most other filing fees in Wisconsin. So those are different forms that are available on the court's website. And those are a little bit more involved. You have to give some information on your income, any savings or assets that you might have, and whether you're receiving benefits. So if you have food share or Badger Care or federal benefits or any other state benefits, then the more documentation you can provide showing that the filing fee would be a heavy lift for you, the better the likelihood that it is going to be approved. So you have to have that notarized when you submit it. That's something that you can usually take care of at the clerk of court sometimes, or legal action is certainly able to do that, as well as sometimes libraries or other community organizations will have notaries that you can go to. But you need to submit everything all at once. You can submit the fee waiver when you file everything, but you have to make sure that it's on the same day, essentially. You can't come back later and say, I wouldn't like to pay the filing fee. You have to do it at the time that you file everything else. So a little more about the publication requirements if you're doing a non-confidential name change. After filing, like I said before, you'll get an order scheduling a hearing. I'm in Milwaukee County, so in Milwaukee, that's usually a few weeks after the filing date. It'll vary depending on the caseload that the court has and how many judges are available. And so, but um, one of the things that you'll need to do is reach out. Usually, you'll want to do it on the same day just so you can get going on the 3-week requirement just as quickly as possible, would be to reach out to those newspapers. So many of the bigger ones, like in Dane County or Milwaukee County, the newspapers that would be eligible for publication will have online forms that you can fill out. And there is, like I said before, there is a cost associated with those, and there's not necessarily a uniform fee waiver process for those, but some papers do have options for reduced payments, or that's something that you can work out with them. But the publication requirement is a hard requirement. If you can't submit proof that you've done the 3 weeks of publication, then the name change can't be approved under Wisconsin law. So when you have gotten that done, when you can get, you'll get a certificate from the paper that will say so-and-so has completed the publication requirement under Wisconsin law. You'll have to bring that to your hearing when you do go and talk to the judge about the application that you've submitted. And you'll submit that along with everything else at that date. So at the hearing, you'll need to bring a copy of your application. Don't give your only copy to the clerk of court when you file it. You'll need that publication notice, and then that would be another opportunity for any supporting documents. So if you're doing a confidential name change, that could be the time to bring letters from therapists or letters from medical professionals attesting to the likelihood of harm if there were a non-confidential process. You should also bring your original birth certificate. I'm only talking about Wisconsin today, so this is just the Wisconsin process. But if you've got birth certificates from other states, you'll need to do that in the state where the birth certificate was issued. But you should bring that just in case, and then if the court asks for it, it's better to have it than not. Most hearings will be pretty quick. Name changes are very routine, and they're going to be trying to churn through, more likely than not, as many as possible. So judges will typically only ask that you confirm who you are. You'll be sworn in, put under oath, but it's relatively relaxed as far as court proceedings go in most cases. So you'll just need to confirm you are who you say you are, that you want your name changed for the reason that you put on your application. And it's just going through the application basically and confirming all of that's right. So in most situations, it'll be just kind of a rubber stamp. The judge will approve it, and then it'll be effective as soon as that's filed with the clerk of court. They might make you do the little bit of legwork and walk it down to the clerk of court's office, but otherwise it'll be done within a couple of days, and then you'll be able to get certified copies of that name change order, which you will need for submitting requests for other changes, like changing your birth certificate and changing gender markers, for example, and also some other documents. So that's the very high level overview of the name change procedure. Gender markers, like I said before, are a little bit more difficult in Wisconsin. So some states allow for gender marker changes, kind of no questions asked. Wisconsin does have a hurdle in that it only allows people who have had, quote, surgical sex change procedures to change their gender marker on a birth certificate. Wisconsin, like I said before, also only allows for a male or female gender marker. You can't do an X, you can't do any other gender marker of your preference. So there's no standardized form for applying for a gender marker change. You could do something like write a letter to the courts explaining what you'd like to do. There is a form that the Wisconsin Department of Human Services, or Department of Health Services, I'm sorry, has on their website that you need to have a medical professional complete and then submit usually an affidavit along with. So that can also be kind of a barrier for people who haven't had a surgical procedure, or maybe haven't had any sort of medical procedure related to a gender transition. But there is a filing fee with that as well. The fee waiver requirements that I talked about before also apply. But practically speaking, it's much harder in Wisconsin to get a gender marker change because of that surgical procedure requirement. That is basically all that the law says, and it's kind of ambiguous depending on the judge, depending on what procedures someone might have undergone, what would actually count. So that is one where if you do want to go ahead with a gender marker change and you're okay with having a male or female marker only and not having a third option, then that's something that you should be potentially prepared for a judge to maybe ask questions about. We've heard about some judges being unsympathetic, to say the least. Some judges can be kind of intrusive. Some judges can be very understanding. But this is one, unfortunately, this is one situation where it is kind of up to the judge that you poll when you're getting your hearing. So it is a little bit more difficult, and it's just something we want people to be aware of, that it isn't as efficient a process or as rubber stampy a process as a name change might be. Other practical concerns related to the confidentiality requirement, like I flagged before, something that might be harder for people to show is that the fear of, let's say, abuse or retaliation that they might have related to a non-confidential name change might not rise to the endangerment standard. That's entirely up to the judge. So there are some places where, you know, people might be more or less sympathetic to certain types of arguments, but it's not necessarily a sure thing. It's better to be as concrete as possible. And that can be really hard for people if you need to submit an affidavit detailing, let's say, past abuse or things that people have said or done to you that you're afraid might happen again. Then that can be difficult for people to go through, and that's something people should be aware of if you're asking for a confidential name change. And finally, just to flag again that if you do have a non-confidential name change, all of that's going to be available on CCAP. So people would be able to look it up under an old name and they'd see a record of that. So that is the overview of the birth certificate. That's the main document that everything is keyed to in the state of Wisconsin. So once you have gotten a name change or a gender marker change done, that's when you'll be eligible to start going through some of the other state of Wisconsin documents and then also some federal records as well. So for the Social Security cards, there's not a gender marker on a Social Security card, but if you want to change your name with Social Security, you have to have the Wisconsin court order. It's no cost, but you'll need to complete that either at a local Social Security office, and then typically, I think it's a several-week processing time before they will actually bounce that back to you, and you'll get your new Social Security information. Your Wisconsin driver's license can only be updated after you've done the Social Security step. So on a driver's license, there's a gender marker that's only male or female. So if you do have a gender marker change in Wisconsin, then you'll need to submit proof of that. Or one of the alternatives that the DMV has is that you can submit a letter from a medical professional saying that you've undergone a transition. So if you don't want to undergo the process for getting the birth certificate itself changed, changing the gender marker on like the official document there, then if you just want to change your driver's license and everything that kind of flows from a Wisconsin driver's license, you can get a letter from a doctor. But it kind of is up to the DMV. They're not very consistent, and their guidance isn't very clear on what documents they will or won't accept. But the court order is the best bet. If you want to change your gender marker just on your driver's license, then you can get that letter from a doctor as well. But to change your name, you need to show the court order, and you need to show that you've updated your name with the Social Security Administration as well. That's to comply with Real ID requirements that are coming up. For other records, things like marriage licenses or divorce decrees or anything like that, that's something that the Wisconsin Office of Vital Records takes care of. I'm not getting into it here because there are a lot more hurdles, but those are also, because it's such a common thing to see name changes related to all sorts of other documents, then they have processes for those in place. So I just wanted to put that as just something to be aware of, that once you change your birth certificate, then it's not like it doesn't just domino into place for everything else. You have to go and follow up on all of the other documents that you'd want changed. So this last part here, these are just a few of the resources that we know a little bit about for helping with name changes or gender marker changes, as well as just general support for individuals who might want more information on other states, for example, or just what resources are out there. So legal action is one of them. This is, like I said before, a practice area that we're hoping to expand on. So if you or anyone you know is interested in maybe working on this with us, then you can definitely send them our way to our intake. But there are other groups. Trans Law Help Wisconsin has put out very good materials on this process as well as other things. And then the Milwaukee Justice Center, based in Milwaukee, obviously, but they help out people with all sorts of forms and just court procedures, basically, in Milwaukee County. And then we've also got some information on medical providers and people who can give just general advice and resources related to LGBTQ individuals as well in Wisconsin. So that was a lot of information all at once. I know that this PowerPoint is going out to everyone if it hasn't already after this presentation. So you'll have an overview of everything that I've just talked about. But you can also share information with students or other folks that you might know connected to tech colleges in Wisconsin and route them to the Lawyers for Learners app through Ascendium and working with Legal Action. So like I said before, our work is on barriers to employment. So it doesn't have to be just name changes or gender marker changes. It can be all sorts of different things. But Legal Action and other providers are all there to help out with a variety of different legal needs. And if you want to reach out to Lawyers for Learners, then we've got the contact information here.
Thank you so much, Evan. Thank you, everyone. I think that was our last question, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Right. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.